Okay, this is Dana Farmer. I appreciate all of you being here on this broadcast from Lien Council, dealing with some basic information about the Utah State Construction Registry. Today what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about notices of commencement, preliminary notices, also called pre-liens, and notices of completion. Those are the three fundamental notices in the State Construction Registry. And so I'm going to talk about some of the rules for that, and then what I'm going to do is walk through and show how, if you are a general contractor or a sub or a supplier, you would handle your compliance and protect your rights using the State Construction Registry. There's an important date that I want you to remember, which is August 1st, 2011. The reason I want you to remember that is that the law changed then, and the significant change in the law is that for projects starting after August 1st, 2011, everybody has to pre-lien the project if it's privately owned. And so prior to that, the State Construction Registry did not put an obligation on builders or general contractors or other people dealing directly with owners to do any filings in the State Construction Registry in order to protect their lien rights. But now everybody on these projects has to do that if they're privately owned. To complicate matters a little bit further, on publicly owned projects, the general contractor is still required to file a notice of commencement, and if the general contractor files that notice of commencement, or if the owner of the public project files a notice of commencement within 15 days after the start of work, then subs and suppliers have to do their pre-liens within 20 days of their first date of work. So we've kind of got this situation where on private property, everybody has to pre-lien within 20 days of their first date of work, and on public property, you only have to pre-lien within those 20 days if the general contractor or the owner has gotten around to filing a notice of commencement, and that notice of commencement has to have been filed in the State Construction Registry no later than 15 days after construction started. So it can be a little bit confusing. So what I want to do is I want to start with general contractors and talk about what generals would do to make sure that they're fully covered, and then what subs and suppliers are going to do. So rather than getting down into the nitty-gritty of making selections between projects and so forth, what I'm going to do is just give you some basic steps to follow on a consistent basis to make sure that you're covered. And these steps aren't something that's unique that I've asked people to do or suggested that people do. I've noticed that several different contractors are starting to do these things. So let's start with general contractors. If you're a general contractor working on a construction project in the state of Utah, depending upon whether it's privately owned or publicly owned, you've got some obligation in the State Construction Registry. So my suggestion to you as a general contractor is that you do this. First, file a notice of commencement. Even if it's a private project, you want to have a consistent policy to be able to have your employees work with, and you don't want your employees to be amateur attorneys. So instead of distinguishing public versus private and when you should file a notice of commencement and when you should just file the pre-lien, I think it's better to have a uniform policy. And so the best thing to do is just, your policy is that you always file a notice of commencement and then you always file a pre-lien on your notice of commencement. If you do that on all of your projects, it's only going to cost you about $10, but you won't have to worry of whether or not you've done the right thing on the right project, because you will have filed the only two types of notices you can on any project that you start, and you'll be covered across the board. So let's talk about notice of commencement for a second. Notice of commencement is a pretty straightforward document. You file it in the SCR. You include the information that you're prompted to include. That's going to be your name, address, and so forth, the owner's information, some details about the project, and so forth. Pretty simple, pretty easy to do. The big key to remember on your notice of commencement is that it's due within 15 days of the permit or actual commencement of construction, whichever starts later. So in this example that you see on the screen that I have before you right now, we have a situation where the permit's issued on September 1st, on-site construction begins September 13th. Since that came later, that being the on-site construction, then you have until September 28th to file the notice of commencement. Important note, you don't have to wait until the permit or the actual on-site construction begins to file your notice of commencement. That's just when the clock on your deadline starts to run. So if you know you've got a job and you're working up to get ready to go on it, even if you filed an application for a permit and that's it, but you don't actually have your permit, you can go ahead and you can file your notice of commencement. And I suggest that you do that as soon as you possibly can, because it's not going to hurt you or impair you in any way. So that's the first rule for deadlines. Now, in some situations, the permit comes out later. So if you find yourself in an odd situation where you start construction and then the permit comes out, then technically the 15-day deadline doesn't begin until that permit's issued. But like I said, as soon as you know you're going to work on the project, go ahead and file your notice of commencement and get it on the project. Then that way you're covered and you don't have to worry about it. There is no ability to file a late notice of commencement. You either file it no later than the 15-day deadline or you don't have a valid notice of commencement. And if that's the case, then that means that your bond is going to be at risk to subcontractors and suppliers. Okay, so that's notice of commencement. So general contractors, my advice to you is always file a notice of commencement on every project, just across the board. Then you know you're going to be safe and you're going to be covered. So the other thing I mentioned was, okay, we're filing notices of commencement on all of these projects. And step 2 is to go ahead and make sure that you file your own pre-lien or preliminary notice. So the preliminary notice is something that historically has only been filed by subs and by suppliers. And what they would do is they would search and find the notice of commencement, and then they would file their preliminary notice on that notice of commencement. Well, that's all over as of the 1st of August 2011 on privately owned projects, because as of August 1, 2011, all contractors and all suppliers have to file a preliminary notice on a private project. And the trick on this, it's really not a trick, it's just a frustrating fact, is that that preliminary notice has to include the tax ID number assigned to the property by the county assessor. So most people do not know from their memory the tax ID number for their own house, but the fact is, as a contractor in the state of Utah or as a supplier in the state of Utah, you are going to have to be able to know or find the tax ID number for every piece of property that you do work on if you want to be able to have lien rights. Whether you like that or not, that's the law in the state of Utah now. So a couple things to keep in mind on preliminary notice. It's a notice that you file in State Construction Registry in order to have your rights. It has to include certain information that you'll be prompted for, like your name and address and phone number, the person that you're working for, be that another contractor, an owner, so forth. It has to include the name of the general contractor, the owner, and obviously information about the property like address or a legal description, and then of course, like I said, the tax ID number for each parcel. So if you're doing a project, let's say that you're a contractor and you're putting in a subdivision and there are 15 lots in that subdivision. If those 15 lots are, if the plat's been recorded and those lots have numbers, you need to include all 15 of those numbers in your preliminary notice. If you're a supplier to that project, you're supplying, say, asphalt or concrete, same thing. You need to make sure that your preliminary notice for pre-lien includes every tax ID number for that. Another place that this comes up and gets a little complicated is in condominiums. If you're building new condominiums or if you're doing work in common area in some condominiums, you've got a claim on all of those condos. And each of those condos has a separate tax ID number. So you're going to have to be able to get all of those tax ID numbers, and you're going to have to include all of those tax ID numbers in your pre-lien. So your deadline on your pre-lien is 20 days after your first date of work. So generals, I was telling you that you need to first file a notice of commencement, and then as soon as you file a notice of commencement, go ahead and file your preliminary notice on the notice of commencement. You should do both of those sequentially all the same day. So that's going to be within your 15-day deadline. But subs and suppliers, you've got 20 days from your first work to file. So this example that I show you on the screen right now is a supplier or a subcontractor furnishing their first work, labor, material, so forth, on April 7th. 20 days after that is April 27th. That's the deadline within which the pre-lien needs to be filed. In my example, it shows that it's filed on the 19th of April, which is 12 days after the first date of work. And if you look at the line on the bottom, that means that you've got lien rights from the very first day, April 7th, all the way through to the end, because you filed within your first 20 days. Now, just like I said on the notice of commencement that you can file it sooner, you can do the same thing with the preliminary notice or the pre-lien. As soon as you know you're going to be working on the job, you can file this thing. And you should. You should absolutely do it as soon as you possibly can. And that way you're taken care of and you're not pushing up against your deadlines. And that's especially something that's easier to do now because we don't have a situation where you have to find a notice of commencement first. It's wise if you can find one. But all of the information that you need for a preliminary notice is now available to you, and so you can file it as soon as you want to. What happens if you miss those 20 days? It's a question I get a lot in my seminars. If you miss the first 20 days, are you out of luck? Well, the answer is no. The fact is that you can actually file after the 20 days, but it just means that you're going to have some penalties you have to deal with. Not financial penalties specifically, but limitations on your lien rights. So what you see in front of you on the screen right now is an example which says that the sub or the supplier does their first work on May 1st. 20 days after that is May 21st. That's the top line that you see there. In this example, we show that the pre-lien comes on the 24th, which is 3 days late. And then as you move across the screen, you see that it shows a 5-day period and that the lien rights pick up on May 29th, 5 days after the filing of the pre-lien. Since the pre-lien came more than 20 days after the first date of work, if you look at the bottom line that says no lien rights, that means that you have no lien rights until 5 days after you filed your notice. So in my first example, where we had filing within the first 20 days, your lien rights started at day 1 of your work and went all the way through to the end. But here, where you missed that original 20-day window, you don't get lien rights until 5 days after you file your pre-lien. And if this were a public project and you were pre-liening a public project, the same would hold true for your right to make a claim on the bond. That you have no right on the bond for materials and labor furnished until 5 days after your pre-lien. So keep that in mind. All right, now the next thing that I wanted to take a second and talk about is notice of completion. At the end of the construction project, the general contractor or the owner can file a notice of completion. If they do that, then lien rights are limited. And the limitation is this. If a notice of completion is filed in the Utah State Construction Registry, it will be emailed automatically to everybody who pre-liened the job. And all liens are due within 90 days after that notice of completion. So if I'm an owner or a general contractor and I want to accelerate the deadline for filing liens, then as soon as that project ends, as soon as I have a certificate of occupancy, as soon as I have a final inspection, I can file a notice of completion, and I reduce the lien filing deadline from 180 to 90 days after that notice of completion. And if you want more information on that, look at some of the seminars on the Lien Council website that go into some detail on liens. And we show you some examples exactly of how those lien deadlines work. But you can file a notice of completion as a general contractor or an owner, and all liens are due within 90 days after the notice of completion. Big thing to remember is you can't file the notice of completion until you have that certificate of occupancy or final inspection. Okay, so those are the general rules on what you file and when you file it. The thing to keep in mind, as I said, is that you do it as soon as you can. Don't wait until your first date of work to file a notice. Just do it as soon as you can. So what I want to show you here now is over on the Lien Council website, how to get the information that you need to be able to validly file your notices. So as you know, you can just, once you have an account, you can log on to the website. So the first thing that you want to do is you want to go to the Search Center and then maximize the screen and go ahead and click the Launch SCR button. So let's talk notices of commencement first. So you come into the State Construction Registry, and let's say that you're a general contractor. As I told you, as a general, on public projects, you got to file a notice of commencement. On private projects, you got to file a preliminary notice / pre-lien. So what you're going to do is you're just going to file a notice of commencement or preliminary notice on all your projects. So here's what you do if you're the general contractor. You come right here to where it says Notice of Commencement, and you click on that button. And then that gives you the page where you can start filling out information. So you would select here and you would say, I am the general contractor. And then you're going to put in the name, address, email, and phone number information for the owner. Your information is going to be stored. So here where it says original contractor information, once you set up your account, that's all going to be in there. And then here's the next part. You got to put in a legal description or an address for the property. And then the other thing that you got to do is you've got to do this tax parcel number that's shown down here towards the bottom of the project property information. So how do you get the tax parcel ID number? Well, Lien Council's got a solution for you on that. What you do in the search center on Lien Council is you come in and you select the county. So it defaults to Salt Lake County, and there are about 10 counties that have searchable information online. The Wasatch Front counties, the Wasatch Back counties, and then Iron, Kane, Sevier, and Washington counties. Cache Valley has their information online also. So you can come and you can select the county where you're going to be doing your project. So let's just go ahead and let's say that your project is in Utah County. Now, one of the nice things about Utah County is that they've got maps. So if you know exactly who the owner is, you can search with the owner's name. If you know the exact address, you can search with that. But what we're trying to do is get all the information about the property, and a lot of times you don't have it. So the easiest thing to do is to click on the map. Now, over here on the right-hand side of the screen, you click this Help button, and this is a YouTube embedded video that tells you how to search in Utah County, and that's true of every county. Every county in the state is online. Not all of the counties have databases that you can search, but every county has a website. And so if they're searchable, we've got a video that shows you how to search it. If not, we've got access to their phone number so you can give them a call. But let's just say that you're working in Utah County, and let's say that you got a project that's going down in Provo. So we'll let this map load here. It takes a second. And what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and we're going to zoom in on the property. So what you do is you can just double click, or you can roll the mouse, and that's going to cause this map to enlarge. And each time it enlarges, it has to reload. So what I did is I zoomed in here, and while it was zooming, I clicked my left mouse button, and that brought up this window right here. And you can move this around if you want to by just holding down your left mouse button. So let's go ahead and get out to some of this commercial area here. And if you want to see exact images, you can come over here and you can click this aerial images button on the left, and then that will load the map, and that will allow you to be able to see specific parcels of property. So if you know that you're doing work right here that involves this piece of property, then you can go and you've got the map imagery, so you've been able to identify the building or the land, and you can turn that off because it makes it easier to read. And you can see that the number is this right here, 1906-40027. Then you can click where it says Land Info, and what that does is that launches another window. And in this window, you're going to be able to see all of the information that you're going to need about this property. So you click here, here's your serial number, address, legal description, owner, all that stuff, and then it'll also have a picture down in Utah County of the property. So what you can do is you can cut and paste this information over, and you can put it in your notice of commencement. So you could go back over to the state construction registry and cut and paste in your legal description, cut and paste in your address information, select your county, put in your zip code, and cut and paste in the rest of the information about the tax ID number. Then you have to come down. If you've got a bonding requirement, you'll put in your information about the bond, and then you have to put in a minimum of 1, maximum of 3 email addresses. That is how you file a notice of commencement. So you can see that that's a pretty straightforward, easy thing to do. The key is being able to learn how to search in those different counties to get the information, and we've given you training videos and access to every county on the Lien Council website absolutely free of charge. Now, if you don't want to file your own notice of commencement, you could have us do it for you, but it's going to be a lot more expensive. So if you felt like you wanted to have Lien Council file a notice of commencement for you, that's fine. But my advice is that you learn how to do it on your own and you go ahead and do that. But let's say that you find yourself in a situation where you've done your best to identify information about the property and you're just struggling and you can't get accurate information. Then you can click this green Go button on the Lien Council website, and this is going to take you to what we call the Order Center. And once you're in the Order Center, we have some Google embedded maps on the Order Center. So you would come over here to the map on the left, and then you can go ahead and you can drag Provo to the middle of the map, roll your mouse button forward, and then you go ahead and you zoom in on the property. And you can do this by rolling your roller ball forward or just by zooming in. And so Google has the satellite imagery, so you can do the same thing here. You can click on the satellite. That's going to show you a picture. So this is the University Mall in Orem, Provo area. So if you know that that's your piece of property, then you zoom in on it and you double click. Till the full image is displayed. And you go off of that and get your address information and submit that through the Lien Council website. Okay, now let's go back to the Order Center, or excuse me, to the Search Center. And in the Search Center, you'll go ahead and you've put your information into the State Construction Registry. Now the next thing that you have to do in the State Construction Registry is you have to file your preliminary notice if you're the general contractor. So let me show you an example of where this is done. So let's go ahead and select Salt Lake County. Click Filer. We'll look for Notice of Commencement. The thing I told you to do as a general contractor is to file off your own Notice of Commencement. So let's go ahead and search notices of commencement filed by Oakland Construction since August 1st of 2011. This is going to bring up a handful of notices. Some of these are public. You can see this is up at the University of Utah with the owner, DFCM, Department of Facilities and Construction Maintenance. So we got four notices of commencement here. So what you would do if this is your notice of commencement for this project is you would then come over here as a general contractor. You would click on preliminary, and that's going to pull in all the information about the project, and then you can file a preliminary off it. And then you can see up here at the top that it shows a link. So this preliminary notice is going to be linked to that notice of commencement. This is the same thing you can do if you're a subcontractor or a supplier. You can go and you can look for a notice of commencement, and if you find it, so if you're working on a public project, you've got to find the notice of commencement. Then as soon as you find it, you go ahead and you click on that copy button and you file off the notice of commencement so that you're linked to it. Now if we go ahead and if we look for preliminary notices in addition to notices of commencement, so we're going to search preliminaries and notices of commencement filed since August 1st of this year for Oakland Construction. 331 records. The reason it shows 331 records is that we've also got others who have filed in here. So we'll narrow this by turning off filer and just going where Oakland's the original contractor. Or actually vice versa. So let's just look for notices filed by Oakland. So what we're going to find here is that there are a handful of notices that have been filed throughout the state on some different projects. And so what you can see here is that you've got this project up here at the top where it's the same project, but there's a notice of commencement and a preliminary notice filed by the general contractor on the project. If you adopt the policy of putting a pre-lien and a notice of commencement on all your projects, then you know you're covered across the board. But let's say that you're a subcontractor now, and you know that Oakland was the general contractor and you're working on this target, which is this third one down. If you're a subcontractor on this project, you can go ahead and you can file a preliminary notice off the preliminary notice by clicking the preliminary button like that. It's going to pull in all of the contact information, and then you're just going to have to fill in some specific information about the project for yourself. For example, as you can see in the center of the screen right now, you need to put in the name of the company that contracted with you to come out and do work on this project. So that would go in these fields down here. And then obviously your information is going to be down here towards the bottom. And that's going to be stored in the state construction registry, the information about you. So something that you can do as a subcontractor or a supplier is you should search for the notice that's been filed by the general contractor. So that's going to be preliminary notice or notices of commencement. And so you can see the way that I did that is that I came into the advanced search, and then in the advanced search I put the first name of the general contractor in there. And that went into the name field right here. So there's the general contractor's name. And then we went with filer, and then we selected the commencements and the preliminaries. So what that does is it looks in Salt Lake County, where Oakland is a filer of commencements and preliminary notices between the dates of August 1 and December 12th, 2011. And then that gives us this list of notices that we saw, these 7 notices that we found down here. And with those 7 notices that we found, we can find our project. And then when you find your project, you come over to the right, click on the button that says copy, and then you select preliminary, and you go from there. That is the best way to do it. Now, if you aren't able to find anything that's been filed by the general contractor, you could do the same thing that we've done here, except look for a subcontractor that you know is on the project. So instead of putting in the name field Oakland, which is a general contractor, if you know there's some other subcontractor out there, you could put that subcontractor's name in and find their preliminary notice and then file off of their preliminary notice. Now, one thing that I want you to keep in mind is this. Once you decide to file off of somebody else's notice, you need to remember that you are relying upon their information. So see here where it says tax parcel ID number, you should cross-check that information. So I copied that and then come back over to the Search Center in Lien Counsel and go ahead and put the information in, paste it in and search it, and make sure that the tax ID number or other property information from the person whose notice you're using matches up with actual information at the county recorder's office. So that's one of the valuable things about Lien Counsel is that you can search information originally, or if you're a sub or a supplier and you're filing on someone else's notice, you can check and make sure that they've got legitimate and valid information that's in there that you're filing off of. Because if it's wrong, you run the risk that you have an invalid preliminary notice, which means that your lien rights or bond rights could be at risk. So use the Search Center to cross-check. And if the county doesn't have information online, call the recorder's office, give them the number, and then make sure that the owner's name and the address and so forth match up and that you're dealing with the correct piece of property. Most of the time you probably will, but just use that to be safe. So that's the basics of the Utah State Construction Registry. Let me rehash again what I think is best to do. General contractors, builders, always file a notice of commencement and then always file a preliminary notice on your notice of commencement. That policy will cover you on all projects. Subs, suppliers, always search for the notice from the general contractor, whether it be a notice of commencement or a preliminary notice. If you find a notice of commencement, always file on the notice of commencement. If you can't find a notice of commencement from the general, go ahead and file off of their preliminary notice or somebody else's. But remember, you should always include the tax ID number in your pre-lien or preliminary notice. Failure to include that could put you at risk. Failure to include any required information could put you at risk. So keep those things in mind when you use the state construction registry. Another thing that I want you to remember is this. The Lien Council website is designed for the specific purpose of providing information, whether it's training, whether it's general information, or what have you about lien rights and bond rights in Utah, Idaho, and Wyoming. So anytime you have a question about this or other things relating to lien rights or bond rights for construction projects located in Utah, Idaho, or Wyoming, you can call Lien Council and get answers. So our contact information is easy to get to. You just click the contact button, which is up at the top of the bar there, and then that'll bring you in here where you can get the toll-free number or send questions in on our answer hotline. So I hope this information has been informative. I hope it's been helpful. I look forward to you being in on other Lien Council webinars, and if you have suggestions for things that you would like to learn about that aren't included in our list of webinars, please feel free to contact us and let us know, and we'll be happy to put something together.